Dad, can she eat with us? Lucas Carter asked so quietly that his words almost disappeared beneath the soft clatter of silverware and the low conversations filling the little diner. Benjamin Carter stopped folding his napkin. He followed his son's gaze toward a woman sitting alone near the rain-speckled window. She had ordered only a sandwich and a glass of water, carefully breaking the bread into smaller pieces as though she hoped the meal would last longer than the evening. Benjamin studied her for only a moment before standing from the booth. He did not walk toward her table. Instead, he crossed the room to the register, leaned close enough to speak privately with the cashier, and quietly placed something on the counter. The young cashier looked up with surprised eyes before giving a small nod. Benjamin returned to his seat without saying a single word. No one in the diner knew what he had done, but something invisible had already begun to change. Before we continue, I would love to hear from you in the comments. How old are you? Where are you from? And if you enjoy heartfelt stories like this, subscribing to the channel encourages me to keep creating more meaningful stories for you. Tuesday evenings belonged to Benjamin and Lucas. No client meetings, no construction drawings spread across the kitchen table, no late-night calls from contractors. No matter how busy the week became, Benjamin protected those few hours with the same determination he used to protect every promise he had ever made. The small diner sat only 10 minutes from their home, tucked between a family-owned bookstore and an aging movie theater that still displayed hand-painted posters beneath glowing lights. The waitress greeted them by name before they even reached their usual booth beside the front window. Lucas always chose the seat facing the dining room instead of the street. Benjamin had noticed that habit years ago. His son liked watching people, not to judge them but to wonder about them. Benjamin unfolded his cloth napkin with careful hands before placing it neatly across his lap, the same small ritual every week. Lucas smiled as he reached for the crayons the waitress always left beside his plate, though he was already 10 and far too old to need them. Instead of drawing superheroes, he sketched tiny houses, trees, and smiling stick figures sharing picnic tables. Benjamin glanced at the drawing while stirring cream into his coffee. Another neighborhood? Lucas nodded without looking up. Everybody should have someone to eat with. Benjamin smiled faintly but said nothing. Some lessons did not need to be repeated because children remembered them better than adults expected. Across the room, the woman remained alone. Her light brown handbag rested on the floor with the strap wrapped twice around her wrist instead of hanging from the chair. She studied the menu for several seconds before quietly closing it and sliding it toward the edge of the table. When the waitress returned with a warm smile and asked whether she would like anything else, the woman thanked her politely, touched the rim of her water glass, and shook her head with a grateful smile that never quite reached her tired eyes. Benjamin noticed the untouched mustard packet beside her sandwich. Lucas noticed something else. "She keeps looking at everyone else's food," he whispered. Benjamin looked again, this time more carefully. The woman never stared. Her eyes simply paused for a heartbeat whenever another table received fresh plates before returning to her own meal. There was no embarrassment in her posture, only quiet discipline, as though she had practiced making little feel like enough. Benjamin lowered his gaze to his coffee cup. Years of raising Lucas alone had taught him something his profession never could. Some people asked for help with words. Others spent all their strength pretending they did not need any. Across the diner, the cashier slipped a small cream-colored envelope beneath the register where no customer could see it. She looked once toward the woman by the window, then toward Benjamin, who had already resumed cutting Lucas's grilled cheese into smaller squares while listening to his son explain why every neighborhood should include one extra chair that never belonged to anyone because someone might need it someday. Benjamin remained focused on Lucas while the young cashier quietly slipped the cream-colored envelope beneath the register. He buttered another piece of grilled cheese, slid it onto his son's plate, and listened as Lucas explained why every neighborhood should have at least one bench where strangers could sit together without feeling out of place. Benjamin smiled, not because the idea was unusual, but because it sounded exactly like something Lucas's mother would have said years ago. The conversation drifted naturally toward school, a science project, and the birdhouse they still had not finished painting in the garage. Across the dining room, the woman remained alone. She unfolded a paper napkin with careful precision before placing half of her sandwich inside it. Benjamin noticed the movement without appearing to look. She was saving part of her dinner for later. The realization settled quietly in the back of his mind. A few minutes later, the waitress approached her table carrying the small leather check holder. Before setting it down, she reached beneath the counter, removed the cream-colored envelope, and placed it gently beside the receipt. "Someone asked me to give you this after your meal," she said with a warm smile before walking away. Emma Reynolds looked around instinctively. Families laughed together over pie. Two elderly friends argued cheerfully about baseball near the coffee station. A young couple studied a road map across the room. No one seemed to be paying attention to her. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside rested a prepaid meal card and a folded note written in neat handwriting. "Everyone deserves one peaceful meal." She read the sentence twice. Her fingertips remained against the paper for several quiet seconds before she looked toward the dining room again. There was no signature, no explanation, no request, only those 6 words. Emma slipped the note back into the envelope instead of throwing it away. She reached for the second half of her sandwich and, for the first time that evening, took a bite without glancing toward the menu board hanging above the counter. The waitress returned carrying a bowl of warm vegetable soup. Emma looked surprised. "I did not order this." The waitress smiled gently. "It comes with the meal card. Please enjoy it while it is hot." Emma hesitated. "I really cannot." The waitress interrupted with a small shake of her head. "Someone wanted tonight to be different for you." Emma looked down at the steam rising from the bowl. She wrapped both hands around it before lifting the spoon. Across the room, Lucas watched quietly. "Dad," he whispered. "She is smiling now." Benjamin looked only long enough to see the faint change around the woman's eyes before returning his attention to his son. "Sometimes," he answered softly, "people smile because they finally get a chance to breathe." Lucas thought about that while finishing the last bite of his dinner. When Benjamin reached for the check, he noticed the cashier giving him a subtle nod from behind the register. Nothing more needed to be said. He settled the bill, thanked the waitress as he always did, and held the front door open for Lucas. Outside, the cool evening air carried the scent of rain drifting in from the west. Lucas climbed into the passenger seat, but did not close the door immediately. He looked back through the diner's front window where Emma still sat quietly with the bowl of soup warming her hands. "Do you think she knows who helped her?" Benjamin started the engine before answering. "No." Lucas looked back one last time. "Will you ever tell her?" Benjamin watched the glow of the diner reflected across the wet pavement before gently shaking his head. Kindness does not become more valuable because someone knows where it came from. Emma remained at the diner long after most of the dinner crowd had drifted back into the cool evening. She did not hurry through the bowl of vegetable soup. Each spoonful seemed to slow the constant rhythm that had ruled her days for months, the silent calculation of what every dollar could or could not buy. When she finally finished, she folded the handwritten note along its original crease and slipped it carefully inside the inner pocket of her handbag, rather than throwing it away with the receipt. Some things deserve to be carried even if they came from strangers. Before leaving, she thanked the waitress one last time. "If the person ever comes back," she said softly, "would you tell them they reminded someone she still mattered?" The waitress smiled with gentle understanding. "I will." Outside, the rain had begun again. Emma pulled her light jacket closer around her shoulders and walked toward the bus stop 2 blocks away. The shelter stood empty except for an older man reading yesterday's newspaper beneath the dim overhead light. The last evening bus had already passed. Emma unfolded the schedule anyway, studying it for several seconds before carefully folding it again. There was no frustration on her face, only acceptance. She adjusted the strap around her handbag and began the long walk home. The sidewalks glistened beneath the streetlights while passing cars sprayed thin ribbons of water across the curb. Nearly 40 minutes later, she reached a modest church on the edge of town. A small wooden sign beside the entrance read "Evening Shelter Open." She stepped inside, signed her name on the volunteer clipboard, and accepted a clean blanket from an elderly woman whose silver hair was tucked neatly beneath a knitted cap. "Long day?" the volunteer asked kindly. Emma smiled. It ended better than it began. Upstairs, 6 narrow beds filled the women's room. Emma chose the one nearest the window, removed her shoes, and placed her handbag beside the pillow. From inside, she carefully took out 3 items. A folded resume with softened corners, a silver house key that no longer unlocked anywhere she lived, and the cream-colored envelope. She read the note once more before slipping it back inside. Everyone deserves one peaceful meal. The words seemed almost impossible because they expected nothing in return. The next morning, sunlight filtered through stained glass windows into the church dining hall where volunteers served oatmeal and toast. Emma arrived early enough to help set tables before breakfast began. She straightened chairs, carried cartons of milk from the kitchen, and quietly refilled empty coffee cups without waiting to be asked. One elderly volunteer noticed, "You always find work before someone gives you any." Emma smiled while arranging napkins into neat stacks. It helps the morning start faster. After breakfast, she walked downtown carrying her resume inside a simple blue folder. One office accepted an application with polite promises. Another manager explained they were reducing staff instead of hiring. At a hotel reception desk, the supervisor thanked her for applying before explaining that the position had already been filled. Emma thanked each person with the same calm courtesy she had offered the waitress the night before. She never argued. She never pleaded. By early afternoon, she sat alone beneath a maple tree outside the public library. From her handbag, she removed a sandwich wrapped neatly in wax paper. She ate half, folded the remaining portion just as carefully as she had folded the note, and returned it to her bag for later. Nearby, children laughed while chasing pigeons across the sidewalk. Emma watched them for a quiet moment before opening a library book about community event planning she had borrowed earlier that week. She underlined nothing. She simply turned each page slowly, refusing to let difficult seasons convince her she no longer belonged in the future she was still quietly preparing for. Nearly 2 weeks passed before Tuesday evening returned. Benjamin parked outside the same little diner while Lucas hurried toward the entrance, already talking about a history quiz he thought he had aced that morning. Benjamin locked the truck and smiled as he listened, carrying the familiar rhythm of their weekly tradition into another ordinary night. Inside, the waitress greeted them with the same cheerful wave before leading them to their usual booth. Lucas glanced almost immediately toward the corner table by the window. It sat empty. He did not say anything, but Benjamin noticed the brief disappointment that crossed his son's face before disappearing just as quickly. They ordered dinner, talked about school projects, and laughed over a story involving a runaway classroom hamster. Halfway through the meal, the front door opened with a soft chime. Lucas looked up instinctively. "Dad," he whispered. Benjamin followed his son's eyes. Emma stepped inside carrying the same blue folder beneath one arm. Her sweater was neatly pressed, though the sleeves had been carefully mended near one wrist. She paused for a moment as though deciding whether she should stay before choosing a small table several feet away from their booth. The waitress welcomed her warmly. This time Emma ordered without studying the prices for several long moments. She requested a bowl of soup, a turkey sandwich, and hot tea. It was still a simple meal, but Benjamin noticed she did not hesitate before speaking. Lucas smiled quietly. "She came back." Benjamin nodded once. "She did." A few minutes later, Emma happened to glance across the dining room. Her eyes met Lucas's first. The boy offered an enthusiastic wave without hesitation. Emma seemed surprised before returning a gentle smile. After a brief pause, she walked toward their booth, stopping just far enough away not to intrude. "Hello," she said warmly. "I remember you." Lucas grinned. "I am Lucas." He pointed proudly across the table. "And this is my dad, Benjamin." Benjamin stood politely. "It is nice to see you again." Emma nodded. "You too." She hesitated for only a heartbeat before continuing. "I wanted to thank both of you." Benjamin looked at her with calm curiosity. "For what?" Emma held the cream-colored envelope in her hands. Its edges had become slightly worn from being carried every day. "I do not know who paid for my dinner that night," she said, "but your son smiled at me before you left. Somehow, that mattered just as much." Benjamin glanced briefly toward Lucas before returning his attention to Emma. Sometimes a smile arrives exactly when someone needs it. Emma looked down at the envelope. "I almost threw this away." She unfolded the small handwritten note with careful fingers. "Instead, I carried it everywhere." Lucas leaned forward. "Why?" Emma smiled. "Because whenever something difficult happened, I remembered there was at least one evening when the world felt a little kinder than I expected. Silence settled comfortably between them. It was not awkward. It simply allowed the words to find their proper place. The waitress arrived carrying Emma's tea. "Would you like to join them?" she asked casually. Emma looked toward Benjamin. Before she could answer, he smiled politely and shook his head almost imperceptibly. He understood that kindness should never become pressure. Emma noticed the gesture and appreciated it. "Thank you," she said to the waitress, "but I think I will stay at my own table tonight." Lucas looked briefly disappointed before Emma smiled at him again. "Maybe another time." "Okay," Lucas replied easily. As she returned to her seat, Benjamin watched her unfold a library book beside her soup instead of reaching for her phone. A small bookmark slipped onto the table. Printed across it were the words Eastwood Public Library. Benjamin quietly remembered the name, while cutting another piece of grilled chicken for Lucas. He did not yet know why the details stayed with him. He only knew that sometimes the smallest pieces of a story became important long before anyone realized they would. Saturday mornings followed a rhythm Benjamin rarely interrupted. He drove Lucas to the public library, before stopping at the nearby farmer's market for fresh vegetables and coffee beans. Lucas loved the library almost as much as he loved the diner, and Benjamin never rushed him. While other parents watched the clock, Benjamin believed that curiosity deserved time. As they stepped through the library doors, the familiar scent of old books and polished wood greeted them. Lucas hurried toward the children's section with 2 books already in mind, leaving Benjamin to wander slowly through the history shelves. A quiet voice drifted from the community bulletin board near the entrance. "Thank you. I really appreciate you letting me leave the flyer here." Benjamin glanced up. Emma stood speaking with the librarian, carefully pinning a simple announcement onto the bulletin board. It read, "Winter Community Festival Volunteers Needed." Her blue folder rested beneath one arm, though it looked noticeably thinner than before. She turned and recognized Benjamin almost immediately. Surprise softened into a warm smile. "Good morning." "Good morning," Benjamin replied. "Looks like the library has become your office." Emma laughed quietly. "Only for a few minutes today." She stepped aside so another visitor could pass before continuing. "I was hired to help coordinate this year's winter festival at the community center." Benjamin looked toward the flyer. "Congratulations." She smiled with genuine pride. "Thank you. It is temporary, but it is a beginning." Benjamin nodded. The best beginnings usually are. For a brief moment neither of them spoke. There was no awkwardness, only the comfortable silence shared by 2 people who respected it. Emma lightly touched the edge of the bulletin board, smoothing the corner of the flyer until it sat perfectly straight. Benjamin noticed the familiar habit. She seemed to straighten small things whenever she needed a moment to gather her thoughts. "I wanted to tell you something," Emma said. "That night at the diner, I never found out who helped me." Benjamin listened quietly. "But because of that note, I stopped believing every stranger was too busy to notice someone else." Benjamin smiled gently. "That sounds like a good lesson to keep." Before Emma could answer, Lucas came running across the library carrying 3 books against his chest. "Miss Emma," he called happily. She knelt slightly so they were closer to eye level. "Did you find something interesting?" Lucas proudly held up a book about famous bridges. "Dad designs buildings, so I am learning how people make things that last." Emma looked toward Benjamin with quiet admiration. "That sounds like an excellent reason to read." Lucas noticed the colorful flyer beside her. "Are you making the winter festival?" Emma nodded. "I am helping organize it." Lucas's eyes brightened. "Can we come?" Emma laughed softly. "I hope everyone comes." Benjamin rested one hand lightly on Lucas's shoulder. "If our schedule allows, we will." Emma reached into her folder and removed one extra flyer. "Here." Benjamin accepted it without examining it immediately. "Thank you." "No," Emma replied with a small smile. "Thank you for listening." She offered Lucas one last wave before walking toward the library exit, sunlight spilling across the floor as the automatic doors opened. Benjamin watched her leave only for a moment before unfolding the flyer. It listed volunteer opportunities, children's art displays, neighborhood food drives, and family activities scheduled throughout December. Tucked into the bottom corner was a handwritten note added after printing. Every helping hand makes someone else's burden lighter. Benjamin folded the paper carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Lucas looked up. "Are we going?" Benjamin smiled. "I think we just found our weekend plans." The first Saturday of December arrived wrapped in crisp air and pale winter sunlight. Benjamin and Lucas parked beside the community center nearly an hour before the festival officially opened. Volunteers carried folding tables across the parking lot, while strings of white lights hung from the wooden beams surrounding the entrance. The scent of cinnamon, fresh coffee, and pine drifted through the cool morning breeze. Lucas hurried ahead carrying a small box filled with handmade birdhouses that his class had painted for the charity auction. Benjamin followed at an easier pace, balancing 2 folding chairs over one shoulder. Inside the main hall, organized activity replaced the quiet emptiness they had seen only weeks before. Children laughed while decorating paper snowflakes. Local musicians tuned guitars near the stage. Volunteers arranged donated coats along one wall for families who needed them. At the center of it all stood Emma. She held a clipboard in one hand while calmly answering questions from 3 different volunteers without raising her voice once. Every few moments she paused to straighten a crooked sign or gently reposition a display until everything looked welcoming. Benjamin noticed the same careful habit again. She did not simply organize events. She quietly restored order wherever she went. Emma looked up just as Lucas waved enthusiastically from across the room. Her face brightened immediately. "You made it." Lucas placed the birdhouses on a display table. "We finished painting them yesterday." Emma examined each one with genuine admiration. "These are beautiful. The children who receive them are going to love them." Lucas smiled proudly before joining several other children decorating holiday cards nearby. Benjamin set the folding chairs beside the stage. "Where do you need me?" Emma glanced down at her clipboard before handing him a volunteer badge. "Could you help direct families to the activity rooms? Half our volunteers called in sick this morning." Benjamin pinned the badge onto his jacket without hesitation. "Happy to help." The hours passed quickly. Benjamin greeted arriving families, carried boxes, fixed a loose table leg, and quietly solved small problems before anyone else noticed them. Lucas spent most of the afternoon helping younger children hang handmade ornaments across a large evergreen tree, standing in the middle of the hall. Every so often Benjamin caught sight of Emma moving steadily from one corner of the building to another. She rarely stopped. She checked every detail twice, thanked every volunteer by name, and never allowed the growing crowd to interrupt her calm expression. Late in the afternoon, the final children's art workshop ended. Emma leaned briefly against the hallway wall, rubbing one tired shoulder before picking up another stack of papers. Benjamin approached carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate from the refreshment table. "You look like you forgot to schedule a break," he said with a gentle smile. Emma accepted 1 cup with both hands. "I thought I had time." She laughed softly. "Apparently I was wrong." For several quiet moments they stood beside the window watching children run through the courtyard outside, while snowflakes began drifting gently from the gray afternoon sky. "The festival turned out well," Benjamin said. Emma looked across the crowded hall where neighbors laughed together. Volunteers served warm meals, and children proudly carried handmade crafts toward waiting parents. "It did," she answered. "For the first time in a long while, I feel like I am building something instead of trying to replace what I lost." Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the strongest foundations are the ones we never planned to build." Before either of them could say anything more, Lucas came running toward them holding a small paper ornament shaped like a house. "Miss Emma," he said, slightly out of breath, "I made this for the community tree, but I think it belongs somewhere else." He carefully placed the ornament into Emma's hands. Across the front, written in uneven blue letters, were the words, "Every home begins with kindness." Emma looked down at the ornament for a long moment before smiling with quiet gratitude, then carefully slipped it into the inside pocket of her coat instead of hanging it on the tree. Winter settled gently over the town during the weeks that followed the festival. The community center became busier than ever, filled with donation drives, children's workshops, and evening classes that often stretched well past sunset. Emma arrived before the lights were switched on each morning, and usually locked the front doors herself at night. She never complained about the long hours. Instead, she greeted every volunteer with the same patient smile and remembered every child's name by the second visit. Benjamin and Lucas continued stopping by whenever their schedules allowed. Sometimes they helped stack folding chairs after weekend events. Other afternoons they simply delivered boxes of donated books from the library. Their visits never felt planned. They became part of the quiet rhythm that slowly connected three lives without anyone forcing the pieces together. One Wednesday evening, as Emma finished organizing paperwork inside the nearly empty office, the receptionist stepped quietly into the doorway. "Someone is here asking for you." Emma looked up from her desk. "Did they leave a name?" The receptionist hesitated. "He said you would remember him." Emma placed her pen down carefully before walking into the hallway. Standing near the entrance was Richard Palmer, the former executive director of the event company where she had worked for nearly 8 years. His hair carried more gray than she remembered, and the confident posture that once filled every room had softened into something uncertain. For several long seconds neither of them spoke. Finally Richard removed a folded envelope from his coat pocket. "Thank you for seeing me," Emma answered politely. "What brings you here?" He glanced around the busy community center before lowering his eyes. "I came to apologize." Emma remained still. Richard continued quietly. "When the budget cuts happened last year, rumors started spreading that someone had mishandled vendor contracts. I accepted what other people told me without checking the facts myself. By the time I learned you had done nothing wrong, you had already resigned." Emma listened without interrupting. The hallway remained peaceful except for distant laughter drifting from the children's art room. Richard held out the envelope. "The internal audit was completed 2 months ago. It cleared your name completely. I should have contacted you sooner." Emma accepted the envelope but did not open it. "Thank you for telling me." Richard looked surprised by her calmness. "You are not angry?" Emma smiled gently. "I was. For a while." She glanced through the office window where volunteers arranged supplies for the next day's food drive. "Then life introduced me to people who reminded me that one person's mistake does not have to become the center of my future." Richard lowered his head. "I wish I had been one of those people." Emma answered softly. "Perhaps today you are." At that moment the front doors opened again. Benjamin and Lucas stepped inside carrying 2 large boxes filled with donated children's books from the library. Lucas spotted Emma immediately and waved excitedly before noticing the unfamiliar man beside her. Benjamin simply offered Emma a friendly smile, respecting the private conversation without approaching. Emma looked toward them for only a moment, yet the warmth in her expression said everything Richard needed to understand. She had not been rescued by luck. She had been restored through ordinary kindness repeated consistently over time. Richard followed her gaze before smiling to himself. "It looks like you found good people." Emma nodded. "I did." She extended her hand. Richard shook it gratefully. "I truly hope your work here continues to grow." "So do I," Emma replied. After he left, she stood quietly for a moment before placing the unopened envelope into a desk drawer instead of her handbag. Some chapters deserved acknowledgement, but they no longer needed to be carried everywhere. She closed the drawer gently, walked toward Benjamin and Lucas, and smiled as Lucas proudly held up a stack of colorful storybooks. Without saying a word, Benjamin noticed that the weight she had carried in her shoulders since the day they first met seemed just a little lighter. By early spring, the community center no longer felt like a temporary workplace for Emma. It had become part of her daily life, just as naturally as Tuesday dinners had remained part of Benjamin and Lucas's. The bulletin boards she once carefully straightened were now covered with children's drawings, neighborhood announcements, and photographs from successful food drives. Fresh flowers sat near the reception desk every Monday morning because one of the volunteers insisted the building should always look welcoming before the first family arrived. Emma always trimmed the stems herself before placing them in water. Some habits quietly became traditions without anyone noticing when they began. One Friday afternoon Lucas climbed into Benjamin's truck holding a cream-colored envelope decorated with blue stars. "Dad," he said excitedly, "our school art exhibition is next Thursday." Benjamin smiled as he backed out of the parking space. "I remember. You have been talking about it for 3 weeks." Lucas laughed. "Because it is important." He handed the envelope across the center console. Every student gets 2 guest invitations. Benjamin glanced briefly at the card before returning his eyes to the road. Then we will both be there. Lucas hesitated. Actually, Benjamin looked toward him. I was hoping Miss Emma could come too. The truck grew quiet for a moment except for the steady sound of the tires rolling across the pavement. Benjamin did not answer immediately. Finally he smiled. That sounds like a question you should ask her yourself. The following Tuesday evening, after another familiar dinner at the little diner, they stopped by the community center to deliver several boxes of donated art supplies collected through Benjamin's office. Emma was organizing paintbrushes inside one of the classrooms when Lucas appeared at the doorway holding the invitation carefully with both hands. Miss Emma. She looked up with a smile. Hello, Lucas. He stepped inside. My school is having an art exhibition. Emma set the paintbrushes down and gave him her full attention. That sounds exciting. Lucas held out the invitation. Would you come? Emma accepted the envelope slowly. She opened it, reading the printed details before looking back at Lucas. I would be honored. Lucas grinned so widely that Emma could not help laughing. Benjamin, standing quietly near the doorway, watched the exchange without saying anything. The evening of the exhibition arrived beneath a clear sky filled with the soft colors of sunset. The elementary school gymnasium had been transformed into a gallery of children's artwork. Paintings, sculptures, and handmade collages lined every wall while proud families wandered from display to display. Benjamin stood beside Lucas as classmates introduced parents and grandparents to one another. A few minutes later, Emma entered the gym wearing a simple navy dress beneath a light cardigan. Lucas spotted her immediately and hurried across the room. You came. Emma smiled warmly. I promised I would. Together they walked through rows of colorful artwork until they reached Lucas's display. His project showed a small neighborhood painted in bright watercolor. Every house looked different, but each front porch held an empty chair. At the center of the painting stood a long table where people shared dinner together beneath glowing lights. Emma studied the painting for several quiet moments. Tell me about the empty chairs, she said gently. Lucas looked toward Benjamin before answering. Dad says you never know who might need a place someday. Emma felt her eyes linger on the painting a little longer. Just then one of Lucas's teachers approached with a welcoming smile. Lucas, she said, your mother must be very proud of your artwork. Before Benjamin could gently explain, Emma simply looked at the teacher, then at Lucas standing happily between them. No one hurried to correct the misunderstanding. The moment passed naturally, filled not with awkwardness but with a quiet sense that some families were formed long before anyone found the words to describe them. 1 year later, the first Tuesday of October arrived with the same cool evening breeze that had drifted through town on the night everything quietly began. Benjamin parked his truck outside the little diner while Lucas climbed out carrying a flat package wrapped carefully in brown paper. Do not forget, Lucas reminded him with a grin. I know, Benjamin answered. It is a surprise. The familiar bell chimed as they stepped inside. Very little had changed. The waitress still welcomed them by name. The old movie theater across the street still reflected its lights across the front windows. Their usual booth beside the glass remained empty, waiting as though it had been reserved by memory itself. A few minutes later the front door opened again. Emma walked in carrying a canvas tote stained with tiny spots of watercolor paint, after another afternoon teaching children's art classes at the community center. She smiled the moment she saw them. There was no hesitation anymore. She simply crossed the room and slid naturally into the seat beside Lucas. The waitress appeared almost immediately. The usual, she asked. Benjamin nodded. For all 3 of us. Lucas looked across the table with quiet satisfaction. I like hearing that. During dinner they spoke about ordinary things. A family who had received a new apartment through the community housing program. The fall art classes Emma planned to begin next week. Benjamin's latest neighborhood restoration project. Lucas's science experiment involving tomato plants that had somehow grown taller than expected. Nothing about the conversation sounded extraordinary, yet every word carried the comfortable rhythm of people who had slowly become part of one another's lives. As the plates were cleared away, Lucas pushed the wrapped package toward Emma. This is for you. Emma looked surprised. For me. Lucas nodded eagerly. She untied the string carefully before folding the paper instead of tearing it. Inside rested a wooden picture frame Benjamin had crafted by hand from reclaimed oak. Behind the glass sat Lucas's watercolor painting from the school exhibition. The neighborhood remained the same, but this version held one important difference. Every porch chair was occupied. At the center of the painting, 3 people shared dinner beneath warm lights outside a small diner. Along the bottom edge, Lucas had written in careful blue letters, "Nobody eats alone." Emma looked at the painting for several quiet moments before tracing the frame lightly with one fingertip. "This is beautiful," she whispered. Benjamin smiled gently. He insisted on making the frame himself. Lucas looked at Emma. "Now it belongs in your classroom." Emma's eyes glistened slightly, but she simply nodded. "It will be the first thing people see when they walk in." Just then the waitress returned carrying 3 bowls of tomato soup instead of dessert. Benjamin looked puzzled. "We did not order these." The waitress smiled knowingly. "Someone paid for them before leaving." Lucas's eyes grew wide. "Who?" The waitress laughed softly. "They asked me not to say." For a moment all 3 of them looked toward the dining room. Families filled the booths. Strangers shared quiet conversations over coffee. Somewhere among them, another unseen act of kindness had found its way to the right table. Benjamin glanced at Emma before lifting his spoon. She smiled back with the same quiet gratitude she had carried since the night a simple handwritten note reminded her that she still mattered. Lucas looked from one of them to the other before happily taking his first bite. Outside, autumn leaves drifted gently across the sidewalk beneath the glowing diner sign. Inside, 3 ordinary people shared a simple meal, never realizing that the greatest changes in life rarely begin with grand speeches or extraordinary miracles. More often, they begin with a child brave enough to ask one small question, a father humble enough to act without seeking recognition, and a stranger willing to believe that one quiet act of kindness can become the place where a family finally finds one another.